Yes, live. I want to see your video. Well, I'm happy that you all were able to join in. I don't remember when I clicked this thing to go live, but I think I've been recording myself wandering around the kitchen for the last few minutes. Let me get this up so that we can get going, and I won't take up more than, let's see, 30 to 45 minutes of your time is generally about how long these things seem to take. Okay, so Sarah can see me. So this is the topic for today is generating leads from existing customers. And so this is a case study, but it's actually a blend of two case studies so that I could keep it a little bit. What it is I'll take you through the case study with one group, but I'm going to show you data from another group. And today what we'll do is we'll pop through, we'll talk about how we generated new leads from the current customer base. And so this obviously assumes that you do have a current customer base, but we're going to talk about how we do customer profiling. We'll do a quick dirty RFM analysis, and I'll show you how we use that with this group to lead to decisions about the metrics and KPIs that we used and the campaigns that we put together, or the one campaign that we ran and they're still working on. And then how to transfer that to a new prospecting campaign. So I'll walk you through that whole piece. First of all, why current customers? When we start with all lead generation, one of the questions we ask ourselves, especially at LeadGen Compass, but at other places that I've worked, is we kind of draw this super basic grid on, are we talking about existing customers or new customers? And are we trying to sell existing products or new products? And so on that grid, if we had to put numbers on them, we would say the easiest place to start, right? If you're looking to generate new business, like when everything starts to get going again, the first place we're going to turn, right, is we're going to not invent any new products for them. And we're going to go back to our existing customers and see if we can get those things going. Then we'll start wandering into, like, if we have an existing product, we might take that into a new customer base, or a existing product into, or add new products to our existing customers. The twos and threes, we can argue about which one is there, but what we're going to talk about is this one today. And the reason it's easiest to start generating business here is because they know you, they already know your products, right? They're familiar with you, they're through the branding, AIDA, and they've already taken action. But this webinar, just so you know, does assume that you've been in business for a few years and you at least have a customer base and a prospect database that we could be profiling and working from. In the case of the customer that I'm going to use, it's an accounting firm. And so when we dug into their database, they had well over 10,000 customers that went back quite a few years. So a lot for us to work with. They ran their business, and they still run their business for the most part. We haven't really been able to change this too much, but they rank their people A, B, C, and D by annual revenue. And they keep in touch by regular email broadcasts, as well as their accountants are always talking to the people, right? And this time of year, they usually get their people actually reach out to them. And this is what they were trying to combat. So as they're looking for, how do we generate more business? This is kind of where they were at. And they called us in. They didn't call us in for this customer database problem. It was, they were buying a list and they were trying to expand into a new city. And then as part of it, we suggested going through this exercise, and they took us up on it. And so since they're accountants, but we have a very similar database, right? The accounting finance database is great because it tends to be the most accurate since we've been billing these people. It has things that we can use like total revenue, when they first entered the database, like what their first invoice was. You could count up the number of invoices in between, last invoice, so we could see how recently they purchased from us, and any current activity inside there. And it would look something like this. And I don't know if you can see in there, but this is an actual, so this isn't their database. This is a very similar database that we used, and we could see total amount charged, so we could rank them by that, the last charge date, last charged amount, total number of orders, year-to-date orders in 2019, which is when we did this project, year-to-date amount in 2019, as well as first order date and last order date. So with that information, we can start to build a little bit of a database. But the one thing we do right away is we want to also, since we're going to be taking this from finance and accounting, what we're looking for is a way to turn it into a marketing database at the same time. So let's have it serve a dual purpose. And to do that, we used our database, the business database at goleads.com, to add a few elements to it. So SIC codes, employee size, other contacts, and then there was a location information tab that indicates whether it's a headquarters branch or a subsidiary, just in case those things are important, right? So again, we're working with a lot of data, so we have a lot of rows, a lot of columns, and that's how we get started, right? So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna change the database around so that we can move it from finance, accounting into something that marketing can use and get the most out of. So once we have the data, once it's in that format, and I'm not going to pretend like that's the easiest step. It was easy for the accountants, but for most people, it takes them a while to pull this information out. And we can do some data massaging projects inside of QuickBooks or whatever accounting software that people are using to help them pull this information out. But once we have it, we start building a grid. And so this grid, if you're not familiar with it, if you are familiar with it, it's a RFM, recency, frequency, monetary. And what we do is we're just trying to score out this database so that we can start to make sense of over 10,000 rows. Where is it that we need to start first? So in there, if the grid stands for recency, frequency, monetary, the scoring, the reason we do this exercise is because it started to bring up some really good questions as to why is this part of the grid so much fuller than another part, and what do we have to do to move people from one part of the grid to the other. So in this case, one of the things that we noticed right away, just by sorting on how old the last invoices were, is that a lot of the invoices tended to be 2 years, uh, under 2 years that they were active, so active customers or older. Um, that was a good division point. It could be anywhere, you can pick it, right? This is when we talk about a rough RFM, we're not looking for any statistically significant numbers as much as we're just trying to make some decisions and put people in squares so that we can at least start asking the questions and maybe get to something that's a little more viable or valuable from a statistical standpoint. Frequency, that was the number of invoices. And in this case, with this database, when we started sorting it, there was either a ton of invoices, 100 plus, there was somewhere in between, and then there was a whole sea of one-time invoices, just one-time projects inside of the database. So with that, we can use the score there too, right? So we'll score them on recency. It'll either be one value or the other. It's going to be 2 or an O for older. And why do we use codes like that? Just to make it easier for them. And then when it comes to frequency, we're going to use 100 plus, 2 to 99, and 1, and that'll be the middle number. And then the last part of the 3-digit code that we're going to give each of these records is monetary. Is this over 20,000, which happen to be their better customers? 2,500 seem to be another break, or under 2,500 bucks. And so inside there, we can start to build a count. And so how do you do that? It's inside of Excel. I'm not a data wizard, but inside of Excel, you can, once you have the database set up on the front end, these are just sorts. And so I could sort it on recency, and I could code everything that was 2 years or younger, and then everything older than 2 years I could code as O. And then frequency, I could do the same thing, sorting on the frequency of number of invoices, and then monetary, the total invoice number was the number we use there. And then when we get those things together, if you've not used the concatenate function, it's a good time to learn it. And so you can actually mash those three. If those 3 columns are sitting out there, I'm going to say that, yeah, so recency, frequency, and monetary were each grid scores. Then the grid was giving us the 2-1-2.5 or 2-1-U, and giving us the counts inside of there. And so we did the same thing that you would do at this point, right? Is you start asking questions around the concentrations. Like, it's really heavy of the old invoices, people that only have one invoice with us, and they, let's see, the U, so that's under. So a lot of tiny little invoices. We make no value judgment on this. We just start asking questions on it, right? And so maybe the next biggest count is, oh, okay, so maybe that's more than one invoice, but they're still old and undercounting. And what we can do there is with this grid is we can go a little deeper, right? So maybe we're just focused on, okay, anything with a 2 and over 20 is what this group was most interested in. So back to these accountants, what they were looking at is they were saying to themselves, we want more of them. And why is it that we don't have more? I thought that part of the grid would be bigger. So we'd add something like SICs or employees accounts that we get from the database. And so how accurate are those? Well, if the finance database that you're using, your own internal books are super accurate, a compiled database that has this marketing information is not super accurate, but what it is it's pretty consistent all the way through. If we think that a company is between 50 and 100 employees, for instance, there's a good chance that we're between 50 and 100 employees on a good percentage of that database. So you can use it for modeling purposes, which is all we're doing with the marketing database anyways. So when we start looking at those, like we just pulled the 2s, right, which was the first number, and then we didn't really care what the middle number was, but we did care that they were over 20. So, well, actually, I didn't even pull just the 2s in this example, but maybe I would pull the 2s out on this. But I'm curious as to like what's the SIC code that shows up most often. In this case, it was a wholesale and wholesale SIC codes, and what employee sizes show up the most often between 2 and 250 in this case. What do we do with this information? Well, the other thing is that what we do is we go right back to the rest of the database. Like everybody who wasn't in this part of the grid, who looks just like this, right? Who are the rhyming companies in billing that we're after that maybe have the same SIC code or the same 2-digit SIC code, right? If our SIC codes, if you're not familiar with it, I should probably throw that out just in case, are standard industrial classifications that the government gives us or that we apply for it in the government. When you put in there what industry are you in, they're going to give you a code, and it's a 4-digit code, but most marketing companies have broken that out to 6 digits. For most marketing purposes, a lot of times we'll still just use the 2, which is the broadest, 2 digits. The 4 digits, maybe if there's a concentration in 4 digits, is interesting to us. And then the 6 digits is if we're doing a lot more granular marketing than these guys were ready for at this time. What we were trying to find here is, are there any bigger employees like this, employers that share some of these same SIC codes, but don't spend anywhere near $20,000? That became the question. And we look for that in billing, and we look for that in their CRM prospects too. So really this whole thing was just used to start a conversation internally and to start to dig through and set up the very first campaign. So what did a campaign look like? Well, the campaign was rhymers, right? We're going to find the people that sound like our best customers, and we're going to try to find out why it is that they are not investing in our products the same way that the other people are. So what do we do there? The first thing we start with is we didn't just go out and start hammering these people. Why aren't you spending money like all the rest of my best customers? But what we started asking is, what is special about them? And to get that information, start with testimonials. So surveying is the best way to get information. And we found in the past that people give certain information for surveys, but the storytelling that we like to do comes best from testimonials. So can we reach out to them and ask these questions? And inside of a testimonial, it's not just, hey, would you give us a testimonial? It's, I want to ask you a few questions for a testimonial so we can log that information. In logging that information, it is, we'd love to know about their condition before they started working with us, if they can even remember. Like, what was it that had you start working with us would be one way to ask the question, or before we worked together, if you could describe that time period. And then once they've described that, then it's, and now what have you found since you've been working with us? And what surprised you, right? Being 2 other questions. Why do we ask these questions? What we're trying to do is we're trying to find out, like, from the people who aren't spending the money with us, what the difference is going to be between, we collect a few data points so that we can mash them up back and forth when the people are out having conversations. Because that's what this group was going to be doing, is they were going to be reaching out to them directly, right? Going back to the client managers and saying, hey, you need to go out, and here's another 100 people that we found who don't look like our top 20 people, but they seem to share a lot of the same characteristics. Let's find out like what it is that we've already found out what our top people are doing and why they're working with us. Let's go back out to the people who aren't and start working with them. So how do we do it? How did they do it? They took the findings to the writing companies, account managers, armed with these conversation points, and their KPI was they just wanted to double the number that was in there. So if we could go from 20 to 40, God, that would be huge. And it would, right? It adds up to a lot of revenue inside there. This is what they found. What they found was kind of interesting because immediately it went from this is a marketing project to, right? If marketing is one to many, let's design some uh, materials that we can put out to the public, and it touches a lot of people and helps them become aware of us and move forward. What they were asking their people to do was very sales oriented, which is one-to-one conversations. And inside there, they found out that their people are terrible at self-described, not me. This was them describing like, Greg, our people are terrible at this. So they're still working on this particular project, and they started this. It was like late 2018 was slow. Was when this whole project started, and are still working on doing discovery stuff. Which, by the way, is it's not listed on our website, but we've done a lot of training in the past, and we actually did some training with them on discovery questions and that sort of thing. Where we were going with this is and that's what I'm going to talk about here, is future campaigns. We were going to go into things that were a little more marketing oriented. So that was going to generate revenue. That was supposed to help justify the rest of all the projects that were going on. But what we were telling them is inside that grid, once they laid that grid out that we had just taken a peek at, pick a couple places where you want to make some movement, and that takes the database from 10,000. We're doing email broadcasts to these people on a regular basis, down to lists of maybe 70 or 80, and we're trying to move a percentage of them up into this next part of the grid. So how do we do it? So in their case, the ones that jumped out were like it's you're newer, but you've only got one invoice with us and you haven't spent very much money. So you're still within that range. We could probably do more business with you and at least get that second invoice, right? That's what would move that up. Or moving it from one invoice to two, but also moving it above that 2,500. So what is it that we can offer? What is it that we can do more than just, in their case, just a plain tax return? For a lot of these smaller companies, are there other opportunities that are out there? So if that's the goal inside there, then maybe another campaign would be re-engaging. I'm sorry. So there was also the re-engaging the old people who were roughly in the same spot. So the way you do it is you build audiences focused on that segment, right? So when we talk about audiences, if you have email addresses for these people, you should, they're in your customer base. One of the places to put them is to maybe start plug them into an audience inside of Facebook. So you could do some ad targeting to them. But if we're just trying to move them, you can really make a nice focused message with a small group. Okay, so some of the examples, when I switched databases, the numbers fell by a factor of 10, really. So if you took those numbers and multiplied them out, because when you do this matching, in general, when you load your audiences in, if you've done this with inside of Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn or any of these places where you can do these, you can build audiences, the match rate is like 50%, 30 to 50% is what we found. So sometimes higher, sometimes lower, but for the most part, you can knock out about half that. And that's a way to build brand awareness, just keeping them aware and maybe directing them to resources that you have. This is a good place for ebooks, white papers, things like that. Yeah, so that's what you're doing, is you're setting up the audience, you're messaging. Online, you try to warm them up so that when they're coming in the next time, or when they're talking to you the next time, that you have something to talk to them about. So once you're done with that, then what we do is we go into the wild, right? So we take a look at our existing profiles, and we know where some of our better prospects are, or what it is that these people are doing because they're in our database. But now that we have SIC codes and employee sizes, what we can do is we can go out into the wild. That's supposed to be the green dot there, and create new lists that match what you know, and where you can direct what it is you want. So instead of trying to target everybody in this city, which is what they were originally asking us to do, because they were moving into a new city, we just want to target business owners over 20 employees. We were taking that list down and we were saying, actually, let's start with manufacturers and wholesalers, is what we ended up doing, because that part of the campaign they did, but they didn't really do any of the in between, grabbing more marketing or doing more marketing to their existing database, if that makes any sense. So how's that? So Sarah, look what I did. I went really fast on this. So to summarize what it is that we were just talking about, we want to take your existing database, all the data that you have inside your company, and turn it into a marketing database, is the goal when we're trying to generate new business out of an existing customer database. RFM analysis it's easy to do inside of Excel once you get the data put together. The hard part is just knowing what to ask for on the front end. All that information that I threw out on the front end, number of invoices, total number of invoices, like lifetime value, some of that stuff, your accountant should be able to pull in, your bookkeeper should be able to pull in, and give it to you so that we can start to learn from it. What do you do if you don't have a lot of customers to pull from? It's basically, it's the right, if there's the law of large numbers, for people who have 30,000, 40,000 in their database of past customers over the last 10 years. There's also the law of small numbers, which is we could be knocked off track by some of this data if we don't have. If the big numbers get us towards the mean, too many small numbers can send us on wild goose chases. So in general, we don't do a ton of this other than setting it up on the front end because we know we're going to want it at some point. So if you're a consultant and you only have half a dozen clients, it doesn't, RFM analysis isn't going to help you all that much. But if you have 1,000 customers over time, you may be able to glean some information from it. And then before you start your campaigns, you always need to decide on the KPIs. So in their case, it was pretty easy for them once they figured that big campaign out. It spoke to them. They're ready to get after it. I'm not going to, everybody prioritizes things differently. And they were prioritizing getting more of these big customers, especially when they saw the number of them that were in their database already, but they did not have as much of a customer share. And it led to more training. So if nothing else, I guess, now that I'm talking, I could say, yeah, you know, it's a win for them in that as an organization, they're getting a little bit better, a little bit smarter as they move on. And then you get to work. And then once you found this information out, you could transfer it to cold lists, right? So if you know where your biggest customers are and what they kind of look like, and then you have those SIC codes, employee sizes, or if you work inside of different databases, if you sell to consumers, if you sell to farm and ranch, each of these types of databases, you can go get all sorts of different fields. If you sell technology, there's a built with database that has all sorts of technology that people have employed on their website. We've looked at that to do that ourselves. But you want to take that information from yourself internally and then apply it out to be better. So how's that sound? It's like sitting here in my office. So once again, and Sarah knows this, I usually have my partner that I job with, I usually have Bill checking me and asking questions and asking for clarification. But the last one, he's done this to me twice now. He's jumping off on other conference calls now that we're not all in the same building, and I can't hold him to it. But if you had any questions, you could pop them into the Zoom webinar chat or just send them to us outside. The big question whenever I start any of these things is, Greg, what is it that if I'm attending this, what is it that you want me to do next? And what I would suggest is get your internal list together. It's the easiest thing to do because you can do it internally. You don't need any external help, but you need to start with basic fields that you should already have: total revenue, your first invoice, the number of total invoices, your last invoice, current activity. And from that, you can start to build a little scoring system internally for projects like finding new customers. And then check it, right? So the hardest part about any data management is you got to get it right on the front end, sort it, and then you can come up with your first RFM. And your first RFM it's not going to be perfect. It's going to be whatever first cuts you take at this, and you'll get better as you go along in there. So that is the that's the presentation. So uh, that's how we generate leads from existing customers with a B2B actual example with uh, actual data instead of just me uh, talking high level about it. Do you have any questions? Sarah, do you have any questions? I don't even know if, I think Sarah double checks to make sure that I'm still online. I'm good, she says. All right. Well, I don't have anything else for you. If you have no other questions, thanks for attending. It's good information. And if we can help, I can help you put that together yourself so you can look like a hero. And I will talk to you later. Thanks.